It is great to be with you this morning. Such a joy for me to share in this time with you. We have been doing this pulpit swap. This is our third year, I think, and so we were all sitting around one day, and we loved kind of doing the, preaching to each other's churches and getting to know other people, and so we said, well, why don't we just, the five of us, just kind of rotate around for a while, and we tried it out, and it worked, and no one got mad or threw tomatoes, and so we did a second year, and it worked, and we're like, all right, we're going to keep going with this. So it's a pleasure to be with you here on Roundabout Sunday. I bring you greetings from your brothers and sisters at Crestwood Christian Church, who are very proud to join you in doing God's work here in Lexington. I'm sure your pastor, Bennie, is being taken care of at East 2nd Street Christian Church downtown as she brings the word there. If you don't know, that's a historic African-American church in our denomination. I have preached there. I preached there on the first Roundabout Sunday. They are very vocal and demonstrative when they worship. So I'm sure Benny's going to hear a whole lot more of amen and preach it, sister, than I'm going to hear today. So I'm okay with that. At Crestwood, we're pretty low-key as well. About the most demonstrative feedback I get during a sermon is like a vigorous head nod. And so that's, I'm good with that. If you promise to stay awake, then we'll call it a success. How's that sound? Okay.
So our passage today is being preached at all five churches. So we met a couple weeks ago to do a Bible study together to talk about it. And what was interesting was that each person kind of picked something different from the passage that they were going to talk about. It's John's version of the feeding of the 5,000. It's the only miracle that appears in all four Gospels. So for me, that lends credence to its authenticity. That tells me it actually happened. If all four of them tell the story, then that means there's more truth to it. But they also each tell it in their own way. So it's interesting to compare all four and see how they're different. But we're reading John's version today, so let's listen to that. So it says, after this, Jesus went to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, also called the Sea of Tiberias. A large crowd kept following him, which they often did, because they saw signs he was doing for the sick. So Jesus went up a mountain and sat down there with his disciples. Now the Passover, the festival of the Jews, was near. When he looked up and saw a large crowd coming toward him, he said to Philip, "Where are we to buy bread for these people to eat?" He said this to test Philip, for he knew himself what he was going to do. Philip answered him, "Jesus, 6 months' wages would not buy enough bread for each of them even to get a little." But one of the other disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to Jesus, "Well, there's a boy here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish, but what are they among so many people?" Jesus said, "Make the people sit down." Now there was a great deal of grass in this place, so they sat down, about 5,000 in all. Then Jesus took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed them to those who were seated. So also the fish, as much as they wanted. When the people were satisfied, Jesus told his disciples, "Gather up the fragments left over, so that nothing may be lost." So they gathered them up, and from the fragments of the 5 barley loaves left over by those who had eaten, they filled 12 baskets. When the people saw the sign that he had done, they began to say, "This is indeed the prophet who is to come into the world." When Jesus realized that they were about to come and take him by force to make him king, he withdrew again to the mountain by himself. So may God add a blessing as we share this word together this morning, and as we then try to make sense of it. So I try to be a fairly optimistic person. I try to have a positive outlook on life, but there are a few things that can just bring me down in a heartbeat. We all kind of have those pet peeves or those buttons that you can be having a great day and just something small happened and it's just like everything crashes. Losing a basketball game on the last second shot, something that we've experienced a few times. That's one of those things, right? Or walking out to your car to go to church on Sunday morning and stepping in a present your dog left you. True story, not this morning though, thankfully. I checked before I walked in. We're good, but that has happened. Watching it rain when the forecast called for sunny skies, major bummer. And a trivial thing that really sticks in my craw, I don't know if any of y'all can relate to this, is when I go to make a sandwich and find that all that's left of the loaf are the heels. I'm all ready for a nice PB&J or a crispy BLT, and all I have to work with are those 2 pieces of edible cardboard that are left over, right, that no one else wants. I don't like not having enough bread. Well, that's a problem in our story today, right? A story I'm sure you all have heard. It's a story that's often invoked at church potlucks when more people show up than sign up. I'm sure I'm sure you guys are much better about RSVPing to church events than the people at Crestwood are. Because someone will look out at the crowd that has arrived and then survey the pans of broccoli casserole and fried chicken and ask nervously, do we have enough food? And then another person will just look at that one and go, loaves and fish. And then everyone just kind of nods their head wisely, knowing yes, loaves and fish. I have never been to a church potluck where we ran out of food. Right? Loaves and fish. Well, in his version of the loaves and fish tale, John has more on his mind than simply describing a food distribution system. John is a heavily symbolic gospel. There's always a lot going on, and anything John mentions is for a reason. And as he does throughout his gospel, one of the things that he's trying to show his readers is that Jesus is the natural successor to Moses. So he's trying to show that Jesus is the new Moses who is leading the people to the promised land of freedom from sin, just as Moses led people to the literal promised land out of Egypt. That's why you get the mention of the Passover in this story. You know, there's a couple times where John strategically says this took place during the Passover celebration, because the Passover was the major celebration where the Israelites remembered how God passed them over and led them out of Egypt under Moses' command. So you'll notice that in this story, notice Jesus starts by going up a mountain. Just like Moses went up a mountain to hear from God. In verse 5, Jesus asks, where are we to buy bread for these people to eat? And that echoes Moses' question that he asked in Numbers 11, where can I get meat for all these people? And that's where Jesus provides the quail and the manna. Or God provides, Jesus, God, no, same thing. Provides the quail and the manna. I'm not going to get to the Trinity this morning. That's a whole other sermon. Notice also, when God provided the manna in the wilderness, they were only given enough food for each day. Right? They couldn't collect more than what they needed, or else it would go to waste. It would spoil. Notice that Jesus says in verse 12 here, after everyone had eaten their fill, gather the fragments that are left over, so nothing will be lost. Right? Echoing that idea from the manna. And finally, this story is followed. It's always important to look at the context. This story is followed by Jesus walking on the water, right? Which echoes Moses controlling the Red Sea so that the people could pass through it. Okay? All right, so good to know all that. A great question for you to ask right now is, so what? All right, what does that matter? Big deal, nice comparison. Well, in Deuteronomy 18, this is an important point to notice. When Moses is giving his final sermon, so Deuteronomy is like Moses' final sermon before he dies and the Israelites cross over into the Promised Land. So he's sort of giving them his last words of wisdom. And right before that, in Deuteronomy 18, Moses says to the people, the Lord your God will raise up for you a prophet like me from among his own people. Right? That was thought to be a messianic prophecy, the belief that Moses was prophesying about the coming of the Messiah who would come and lead the people to a new kind of kingdom. So notice in verse 14 of the passage that we read today, the people say, this is indeed the prophet who has come into the world. Right? So this is John's way of saying Moses promises a prophet, and the people are saying Jesus is that prophet. He's making that connection to them. So John is saying Jesus is the successor to Moses. You also see that, remember when Moses at the burning bush, and he says to the people, or he says to God, yeah, you want me to go to Egypt? I really don't want to go. I stutter. I'm scared. He came up with all these excuses. And then he says, well, okay, fine. If I go to Egypt and people say, who sent me? What am I going to tell them? And God says, tell them that I am sent you. Right? God says, my name is I am. Well, in John's Gospel, Jesus has a series of I am statements, right? I am the bread of life. I am the true vine. I am the resurrection of life. I am the way, the truth, and the life. Again, he is claiming that sort of divine identity of I am that was told to Moses. So strong connection here between Moses, the prophet who leads the Israelites to the promised land, and Jesus, the prophet who's going to lead God's people to a new kind of freedom. So the story is an example, though, especially when we see this, because the people not only wanted Jesus to be a prophet, but they wanted to make him king, right? Because they thought that the Messiah was going to come and vanquish the Romans, and they were going to take over Jerusalem again. But it's a great example of God's people thinking too small. They only thought the Messiah was going to come and reestablish the headquarters of Jerusalem, whereas God had bigger plans. But people tend to think too small when it comes to God. Do we have enough food? Do we have enough of what we need? And I think a great way for us to sort of see ourselves in the story is to look at the two disciples that are mentioned, right? You have Philip and you have Andrew. Because you have both of them interacting with Jesus, right? So Jesus asks his question, and that's an interesting difference. In the other Gospels, it's usually the disciples saying, where are we going to get food for these people? In this one, it's Jesus saying, where are we going to get food for these people? And notice how Philip answered. He says, Jesus, even if we had 6 months' wages, we wouldn't have enough to feed people even just a little bit, even just a couple of pretzels. We wouldn't have nearly enough. I like that answer. I think it's a very logical answer, right? It's a perfect response to the question. It's simple math. 5 loaves and 2 fish aren't going to feed 5 people, much less 50, much less 5,000, much less the accurate number that was there, which was probably double or triple that. But Philip forgot a crucial variable in this mathematical problem. He was trying to do multiplication without the X factor. Because in most cases, 2 times 2 equals 4, but when you add Jesus to the equation, the numbers don't add up. 5 loaves plus 2 fish times Jesus equals enough food for all the people and 12 basketfuls left over. It's like a church potluck, right? Loaves and fish. Well, we're guilty of doing what the disciples do, aren't we? They're operating under a theology of scarcity. Right? When you do this, no matter how much you have, you're afraid it's not enough. So you hold on to what you have. You don't share it with others. You don't meet the needs of those around you because, gosh, you never know. You might need that. You'll always worry that I'm only going to have the heels of the loaf. What if our potluck runs out of food? And even when it doesn't the first time, or the second time, or the 10th time, you're just sure the next time there's not going to be enough. Got to hold on to this. So what Jesus is trying to do in this story is he's trying to teach the disciples to live with a theology of abundance. Right? When you live with a theology of abundance, your life is guided by trust and generosity because you know that no matter how much you have or how little you have, it's enough. You have enough. And living with a theology of abundance can be a little scary, but it can also be exhilarating because it releases us from our dependence on our possessions and our resources and then frees us to add Jesus to our equation. I've read this and seen it at work, and it's powerful to behold. Here's an example. There's a story that goes, a young nun had a crazy idea. She approached her superiors and said, I have $3 and a dream from God to build an orphanage. And her superiors kind of scoffed and said, you can't build an orphanage with $3. You can't do anything with $3. And Mother Teresa says, I know, but with God and $3, I can do anything. That's living with a theology of abundance. Now, it may sound like, I'm kind of throwing caution to the wind and encouraging us to just be reckless with our resources because, hey, God will provide. But I understand that theology of scarcity. I understand what it's like to worry about having enough. And that's why I'm so glad that God doesn't need a lot to work with. Right? God can work with me. God can work with us. God doesn't need much. Sometimes I worry my faith it's not good enough. It's not strong enough. I don't know if you ever have those concerns, but I do. But I'm so thankful that God doesn't require sort of a fully blown, fully developed faith in order to do the work that Jesus calls us to do. Jesus says in another part of the gospel, even if your faith is just the size of a mustard seed, that's enough. That's enough. God can work through that. And that's why I think we have to look at the other disciple in the story, right? So you have Philip, who's like, oh, we don't have enough. And then you have Andrew. So Philip tells Jesus it's impossible to feed everyone. But Andrew says, well, there's this boy here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. And he says, but what are those among so many people? Well, if Andrew didn't think that Jesus could do something with the boy's lunch, why bring it up? Right? But I believe Andrew had faith in Jesus, even as small as a mustard seed. That Jesus only needed the heels of the loaf in order to provide a feast. Because when you add Jesus to the equation, there is always reason to have hope. In the movie Dumb and Dumber, I'm sure that wasn't a line you expected to hear in the sermon. In the movie Dumb and Dumber, Lloyd Christmas, who is played by Jim Carrey, has a huge crush on Mary. And so he takes a leap of faith at one point and he confesses his love to her. And then he asks her, what are the odds that we can be together? And Mary looks at him and she says, not good. And Lloyd kind of tentatively asks, you mean like 1 in 100? And Mary looks at him and says, more like 1 in a million. And Lloyd pauses for a second. And his face lights up and he says, anyone know? So you're saying there's a chance. Right? So you're saying there's a chance. That's living with a theology of abundance. Even if there's only a mustard seed with Jesus, you're saying there's a chance. Even with only 5 barley loaves and 2 fish and thousands of people, so you're saying there's a chance. So John tells us that once Jesus blesses the food and distributes it, and notice, this is the only version of the story where Jesus passes out the food. Very interesting, because later in this chapter, chapter 5, he's going to say, I am the bread of life. He's trying to help people make that connection. So anyway, after he passes it all out, the people, it says they ate as much as they wanted. And it's helpful here to know the meaning of the original Greek, because it really doesn't make sense. It really says that they ate more than more. Right? They ate more than enough is the best way I can say it. You know, it's kind of how you feel after a Thanksgiving meal. You guys know what I'm talking about? You kind of lean back in your chair, and you do one of these, and you go, woo, woo, I ate too much. And then a half hour later, you're making a turkey sandwich, right? Usually the heels of the loaf. When Jesus is in charge of the food, you eat more than enough, and there are still leftovers. When my girls were little, we used to say how much we loved each other in a way that it became a competition. I'd say, I love you times 10. And they'd say, oh yeah, I love you times 100. And I would say, oh yeah, well, I love you times infinity. Thinking, mic drop. I played the best card I had. And then one of my girls would say, oh yeah, well, I love you infinity plus 1. Dang, she got me. That's God's nap. That's Jesus' generosity. We not only have enough, we have more than enough. We have infinity plus 1 from God. See, we think finitely about God. Do we have enough? But we serve an infinite God. Our world tells us, hold on to everything you have. You may need it someday. But God tells us that there are people out there who need it right now. And we have been given more than enough. More than enough love. More than enough grace. More than enough acceptance. More than enough stuff. More than enough food. There may be things you feel like you don't have enough of, and that may be true. But there are also things you have more than enough of. How can we share that with people who need to know? The amount doesn't matter as much as the spirit in which you give it. A couple Sundays ago, one of our young girls in the church came up to me after church, and she waited till I talked to everyone in line, and then she handed me, we have a little brown cute envelopes, and she handed me this envelope, and she had the most earnest look on their face, and she said, Pastor Kory, please give this to the poor. Like, they're just like hanging around my office after church. And inside I opened up was this crumpled up dollar bill. All right? And I know that Caroline believed in her heart that that dollar bill could make a difference for somebody. Now, you may think, what difference is a dollar going to make? Probably not much, right? But with God and a dollar, who knows how many people that can feed? So here's the thing. If you think you don't have enough, you won't have enough. Right? Because that's the perspective with which you will always come at what you have. Always worried you don't have enough, even when you have more than enough. But if you trust that God will provide, not just more than enough, but more than enough, well, then you'll not only have enough for you, but you'll have enough for others as well. Someone once said, we don't have our issue with food is not that we don't have enough, it's that we have a distribution problem. Right? There is more than enough food on this planet to feed everybody to Thanksgiving full. Right? How much of it do we have? How much of it do others need? The abundance God gives us, and realize we worship a lavish God. We worship a radically, recklessly abundant God. who has poured out on us love and grace and forgiveness through the elements we receive in this table, much, much more than we deserve. But God doesn't pour out that abundance on us to hoard it. Right? God doesn't give us all this love and grace and then send us a pod that we can keep in our garage to store it all in. Right? God gives that to us until, as the psalm says, our cups overflow. And when it overflows, we are called in to pour it out on others. Because we have more than enough. And yet in this local and global potluck in which we live, there are people who don't even have the heels. So what are we going to do about it? Are we going to hold on to what we have? Because someday we may need it. Or are we going to open our hands and share what we have so that it can be blessed, broken, and distributed? Well, is there really enough for everyone? Because sometimes it doesn't seem like it. But loaves and fish. Yes.